they're killing two birds with one stone. They're propagandizing the people that have come over here, right? Pretending to be helpers to help them transition and assimilate into our country, which they would know better how to do that than we do, right? And then, not only that, but they're spying and they're gathering intelligence information. Laws which are enacted for the protection of society have no value except when they are administered in righteousness and justice. And they cannot be so administered in righteousness and justice if dishonest men occupy administrative offices. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Papa, do you hear me? Da-da-da-da-dee. Hello, brothers and sisters. Welcome back to the program. Today we're going to get a little bit political. Just a little bit. I'm crushing your head. Just a little bit, okay? We're going to get political. Only because it's about the Constitution. It's about our nation. We believe this is Zion. North and South America is Zion. And Zion is wherever you hang your hat, right? Wherever the righteous are gathered. But let's talk about freedom. Let's talk about the Constitution. Let's talk about what Joseph Smith said. Because here's what's going on. Are you guys familiar with the Epoch Times? Every once in a while, I read their stuff. And I was flabbergasted, okay? That's the best word I could think of, is flabbergasted. I was flabbergasted because the CCP, which stands, it's an acronym for the Chinese Communist Party, or you could also say the PRC, the People's Republic of China. The People's Republic of China. They are a communist country. We know that, right? They're setting up shop here, brothers and sisters. They have police. Communist police, the Chinese Communist Party have set up their police here to talk to folks, to basically, well, let me read it, okay? But before I get started, so what I'm going to read, the title is Two More Secret CCP Police Stations. They're setting up CCP police stations here in LA, New York, in the Chinatown areas. So we have people immigrating, or I don't know, do they still defect? We have people coming here from mainland China, right? And maybe from Hong Kong, because Hong Kong is now part of China. It has been since 1997. I remember when that transition took place. But the Chinese have somehow fandangled themselves over here under the guise of transitional repression. Okay, making sure that they're getting everything they need as new citizens of various countries, and it's not just our country; it's all over. But before I get into that, I want to read this. Joseph Smith said, "If the Constitution of the United States were saved at all, it must be done by this people." Is this okay? So he says the Constitution will be hanging by a thread, right? Will this thread dangle indefinitely until we fix it? Until citizens of this country or elders of this church or people of this church fix it? Joseph Smith said if it were to be saved, and he said the big if, right? It would be saved by the members of the church or other prophets and those who wrote things in their journal. It wasn't just one person that heard him say this. There were many prophets that came after him, said that he said if. Some said he said elders, some said he said people. However, there are many quotes, okay, by prophets after Joseph that said they heard him say that it will eventually be salvaged by good men and women. And even Ezra Taft Benson, a good brother on my last video, reminded me that Ezra Taft Benson did clarify that it will be saved. But remember, we also have learned that when one person gets up and speaks, it is not necessarily doctrine. That it all has to be clarified by all. that gospel is established by all 15 apostles, including the prophet. The prophet does have revelation. He holds all the keys, and then the other 14 men pray about it too, as well. And so they're all in this together and with their committees, and it's a prophetic venture. But okay, so there are many quotes by other prophets that say that Joseph has said that it will eventually be salvaged by good men and women, freedom loving people. I believe even if Joseph and his successors had a hazy view of what was to come, that they were still moved upon by the Holy Ghost. They're ordinary men with extraordinary callings. In January 1928, the first presidency, Heber J. Grant was the prophet, and I believe his counselors were Anthony W. Ivins and Charles W. Nibley. They made the statement. They issued the statement. Laws which are enacted for the protection of society have no value except when they are administered in righteousness and justice. And they cannot be so administered in righteousness and justice if dishonest men occupy administrative offices. And that's happening today, right? I think even more so than it was happening then. There are more people getting bought off today. It's getting swampy, brothers and sisters. The Lord says, when the wicked rule, the people mourn. Wise men, good men, patriotic men are to be found in all communities, in all political parties, among all creeds. None but such men should be chosen. Right? Sounds good. Why aren't we doing that? Are we trying? Is it being undermined? Are our efforts to make that happen being undermined? We call upon all members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints throughout the world to honor the laws of God and obey and uphold the law of the land. And we appeal to good men and women everywhere, regardless of creed, party affiliation, race, or condition, to join with us in an effort to put into operation the words of Lincoln, the great emancipator, that our country may continue to be a light to the world, a loyal, law-abiding, good-fearing nation. That was in the conference report, October 1928, the first presidency under Heber J. Grant. When I say under, I'm not saying he's the boss. I'm saying he's the prophet. So a lot of you like to take my words and go, stop saying that. You're not saying it right. Okay. Y'all know what I mean. Mormon plainly, let's get into just for a second, we're going to get into this Epoch Times thing about the Chinese Communist Party setting up police camps here. Mormon plainly exhibited the distinct differences between Amalickiah and Captain Moroni. Read that now in the 48 and 49. Amalickiah wanted to destroy the foundation of liberty which God had granted to the Nephites, and Captain Moroni wanted to preserve it. Alma 46:10. Wicked leaders rule for a season, brothers and sisters. They forced themselves into positions of power. They're doing it today, and you guys have in your mind's eye who some of those players are, to be paid and praised, not just praised, not just paid, but paid and praised by our infamous Gadianton robbers. Captain Moroni desired to instill in his people a love for freedom. He did. He loved people. And how keeping commandments is the only way to stay free spiritually and physically, not just spiritually, but physically even. So when the government's corrupt, the people mourn, and governments are usually corrupt because of passivity and wickedness among the people most of the time. Okay, so let's get into this article. Okay, 2 more secret CCC police stations discovered in LA and New York. All right, here we go. A nonprofit group has discovered 48 new overseas police stations with ties to Chinese communist regime. That's crazy. That's crazy, including 2 previously unknown facilities in Los Angeles and New York, which is predominantly big Chinatowns, okay? If you've been to San Francisco, they have a huge Chinatown, New York, and Los Angeles. The newly identified sites are among more than 100 police outposts that are spread out across 53 nations. So it's not just in the United States. The facilities have been used by the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, to carry out an illicit campaign of transitional repression, like I was saying earlier. Okay. Uh, it's funny because when people defected from the USSR, which it was the USSR uh, before it broke up. So when people defected from Russia in the 80s, that was big. I remember there was no representation from the USSR during that time. This is absurd. Uh, so why? Who's allowing these people to come over here and do this? How many of you remember the comedian Yakov Smirnoff? I remember him even as a teenager in the 80s and a kid. I remember Yakov Smirnoff. And basically, his whole shtick, he was a comedian. He was a stand-up comedian. And in his shtick, he would talk about defecting. He would talk about big long lines in the USSR, the Soviet Union, to get toilet paper even. And in the 80s, that was all the way up until the early 90s. That was the end, which was the end of the Cold War. But the Cold War lasted from World War II all the way till the late 80s, brothers and sisters. So Yakov Smirnoff, he was a comedian. I don't even know if that was his real name. He defected. Well, no, he did not defect. He came to the United States with his parents on some program to exchange wheat for to allow people to come here that wanted to defect. So the United States was like, we'll give you wheat and barley, I think, for people that don't want to live there anymore. So that was cool of the United States to do that. So his parents and he were part of that, but I think he eventually stayed and did defect. But his career was ruined because the fall of the Communist Party started in 1989, and the disillusionment of the Soviet Union in 1991 brought an end of Smirnoff's comedy. So my point, not to sidetrack with Yakov Smirnoff, was that we didn't have people representing Russians and Ukrainians. I think he was from the Ukraine, but that was part of the Soviet Union. We didn't have anyone come over here like this to have some transitional repression program. So it's kind of weird. So, according to Safeguard Defenders, a nonprofit organization that published a December 5th update to its findings from a previous investigation released in October, this has been going on, and this is a report from them. Quote, it's outrageous that the communist Chinese government is exercising extraterritorial law enforcement on U.S. soil. Representative Nicole Maliotakis, Republican, New York, told the Epoch Times in an email. But it's too late, folks. We should have started with TikTok. Okay? TikTok is not a good thing. It should be a top priority of Secretary Blinken and Attorney General Garland to shut down these stations to protect our Chinese American constituents and our nation's sovereignty from foreign encroachment. Absolutely. Maliotakis was among several Republican lawmakers who issued a letter in October demanding explanations from Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Attorney General Merrick Garland for the facility's continued existence. The Safeguard Defenders report found that 4 separate police departments in mainland China helped to create the facilities. What the heck? How are we allowing them over here? Which the regime began setting up in 2016. Those in New York and Los Angeles were established in 2018 and are overseas by the Wenzhou, I think it's Wenzhou Public Security Bureau, located in eastern China's Zhejiang province. Exporting repression. The facilities were allegedly created to assist Chinese immigrants in foreign nations with tasks that would normally be handled by a consulate, such as renewing driver's licenses and visas. We have people that could do that much better here that actually kind of care a little bit more. I don't know. Bureaucracy has changed things even in this country, but they didn't care about them getting those things there. Why would they care about them getting them here? There's a reason why these people are here, and it's not to get your help, CCP. Increasingly, however, the stations have been linked to the CCP's United Front Work Department, UFWD, an agency that works to advance the regime's interests abroad by spreading propaganda, conducting foreign influence operations, suppressing dissident movements, gathering intelligence, and facilitating the transfer of technology to communist China. So they're killing two birds with one stone. They're propagandizing the people that have come over here, right? Pretending to be helpers to help them transition and assimilate into our country, which they would know better how to do that than we do, right? And then, not only that, but they're spying and they're gathering intelligence information, right? And transferring technology to China. Most notably, Safeguard Defenders linked the stations to the CCP's Operation Fox Hunt, a transitional scheme designed to forcibly repatriate dissidents and other targets of the regime back to mainland China to face communist persecution. Wow. The FBI, so how do they force them to go back? Is that what they're saying? A transitional scheme designed to forcibly repatriate dissidents and other targets of the regime back to mainland China to face communist persecution. And we're not stopping that. The FBI warned in 2020 that Fox Hunt was a large-scale transitional repression scheme aimed at forcibly repatriating Chinese dissidents through harassment, threats, intimidation, and outright force. Constitution, brothers and sisters, hanging by a thread. In many of these scenarios, the regime attempted to play on racial and cultural loyalty to China, through which it thereby weaponized the Chinese diaspora against itself, urging Chinese living abroad to turn one another in. You can't let TikTok be here, brothers and sisters. Speaking at a November hearing, FBI Director Christopher Wray said that the stations were a violation of U.S. sovereignty and were being investigated. Quote, I have to be careful about discussing our specific investigative work, but to me it is outrageous to think that the Chinese police would attempt to set up shop, in New York, let's say, without proper coordination, Ray said, close quote. He goes on, it violates sovereignty and circumvents standard judicial and law enforcement cooperation processes, you think? Slightly? Close quote. Ray didn't comment directly on the legality of such facilities, but identified them as part of the CCP regime's campaign of traditional repression. The United States and 13 other nations have opened investigations into the facilities. Good. And the Department of Justice has brought forth numerous charges against those allegedly working as unregistered agents of the CCP in the United States. A broad campaign. Meanwhile, the new Safeguard Defenders report discovered that a facility in Paris had directly engaged in at least one illegal campaign to compel a person to return to China, and likely assisted in 80 others. To give an impression of the scale of the effort, the report noted that the Quintian Public Security Bureau in Zhejiang province claimed to have hired 135 overseas Chinese diasporas to assist in its mission. So basically, diasporas are immigrants. We just are using a different word now, I guess. The group also claims that Chinese police persuaded more than 230,000 Chinese fugitives to return to mainland China voluntarily. What did they do? Give them money and then take the money away from them when they got there? This is sad. This is wrong. This is not what the United States should be. Brothers and sisters, this is passivity. This is all is well in Zion. This is no one, and it's also This is like a modern Rome. Did you know that Rome thought they were invincible? They weren't. We are not. Okay? If we are not keeping the commandments, if we are not getting these people out of office, if we are not paying attention, if we are not putting up our own little, if we are not, you know, it's funny because we'll spend a lot of money in our own homes putting antivirus software on our computer, malware to get to block malware and all kinds of things and protect our privacy and do things with our own, but we don't care about what's going on in our government, which will eventually not allow you to do anything. Getting the bugs and cleaning up what's going on in Washington, we're not going to have these things to protect in our homes. Ray explained that the Chinese Communist intelligence agents acting both in person and through proxies hired in America systematically engaged in harassing, stalking, surveilling, blackmailing people who they just don't like or who disagree with the Xi regime. We have seen plenty of situations where the Chinese government, under the pretext of going after corruption, have essentially used that as a vehicle to surveil. We've had situations where they've planted bugs inside of Americans' cars, Ray said. Wow. It's a real problem. I mean, this isn't surprising. We know these things have been going on. But for them to be setting up shop here in our borders, within our land, our sovereign land, that the buck has to stop here, brothers and sisters. And I know this is not a political program, but this relates to freedom and this relates to passivity and all is well in Zion and not being proactive about keeping these things from penetrating our governments and our churches and our way of life. It's a real problem, and it's something that we're talking with our foreign partners about as well, Ray goes on to say, because we're not the only country where this has occurred. Speaking at a December 6th press briefing, State Department spokesperson Ned Price similarly said that the Biden administration was aware of the stations and working to contend with the implications posed by the facilities both in the United States and abroad. I really believe that if somebody else was in office, this would be taken a lot more serious. Well, we're aware of these reports, Price said, because this isn't just a phenomenon in the United States. It's something that we've taken note of around the world. We continue to be concerned about PRC, which is the People's Republic of China, transitional repression. We take this issue very seriously. So they come over here as basically like a social worker from China, and then what do? They put on their badge and their hat, and all of a sudden, proverbially, then they're somebody else when they get here. He added using the acronym for the PRC acronym for the regime's official name, the People's Republic of China. Likewise, Price said that it was unsurprising that the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, would use such facilities as a means of extending its power over the. Why is it surprising? The Chinese diaspora, our immigration, and that such maneuvers are in line with other illicit activities committed by the regime throughout the world. The report describes part of the PRC's transitional repression efforts, where PRC officials reach outside their borders to harass, to surveil, to threaten individuals around the world, including the United States, to silence those critical of its government, Price said. It is important to note that even though you're referring to these so-called unofficial police stations, the underlying issues that these reports have surfaced are not at all new. I believe that. The Justice Department didn't return a request for comment by press time. I mean, it's just like another way of spying. But brothers and sisters, this is what it comes down to. Helaman 6. The righteous Lamanites preached to the wicked Nephites. Both peoples prospered during an era of peace and plenty. And then what happens after that peace and plenty? The pride cycle. The pride cycle, right? Mormon chapter 4 is very interesting. Verse 5, but behold, the judgments of God will overtake the wicked. And it is by the wicked that the wicked are punished. For it is the wicked that stir up the hearts of the children of men unto bloodshed. remember that the Lamanites were wicked. Okay, they didn't keep the commandments. They didn't have the commandments, and that's the kind of wickedness they had, right? Mormon describes their depravity, but he describes it as second to that of the Nephites. Moroni chapter 9, verses 7 through 10. Nephi prophesied that Laman and Lemuel's descendants would overpower the Nephites. And why? Because of the pride of his seed. He says, 1 Nephi 12:19, quote, because of pride of my seed and the temptations of the devil. It took the threat of Lamanites against the Nephites while they were in their pride cycle, while the Nephites were in their pride cycle. Unfortunately, that motivated them a lot to repent and turn to the Lord. But time and time again, if they failed to heed that warning, the Lamanites would destroy them. They would succumb to the enemy. So they had to keep the commandments. They had to be a righteous people in order to be preserved. And if you don't believe that, read 2 Nephi chapter 5, verse 25.